Well, as you can tell, one of the key concepts in operant conditioning is the concept of reinforcement. And it is, those are two key terms, well, one actually, but they're divided into two different kinds. But reinforcers are really the key in operant conditioning itself. And we can divide them into a positive, as you can probably guess, and negative. Now, the way to be sure to remember this is the fact that reinforcers themselves is anything that increases a behavior. Increases a behavior, okay? And so reinforcers always do that. A lot of times, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So positive, something is added in this case and the behavior increases. On the other hand, a negative is removed and the behavior increases. Now let me give you a couple different examples. When we talk about positive, let's just say that you have an exam coming up, and sooner or later you will. And you study really, really hard, and the exam is kind of the situation, if you will. It's kind of the operant box. And you do certain behaviors. You study hard. And you study hard in such a way that your grade is an A. Now, your method of studying is probably going to be similar because of the positive reinforcement of getting an A. On the other hand, let's just say that you have an exam and you don't study at all. And you, on a lark, are lucky enough to get a grade that is a D. Okay? Now, you want to remove that D. You want to get it increased or get it removed. So the next exam comes along and you study harder, which is removing this grade or undoing it, if you will. So study harder. And that removes the anxiety of a bad grade that you had in this case. Okay? So it acts as a negative reinforcer. In other words, it increases your activity by the removal of this anxiety. And study hard also acts as a grade. Let's just say that your grade, in this case, equals a B. And this is a good example where a behavior is not only a negatively reinforced, in other words, it's removing the anxiety, but it's also positively reinforced because you get something desired. So positive reinforcement is adding something to increase behavior, adding a pleasant reward, and that increases behavior, whatever the behavior is. In negative reinforcement, it's the removal of an aversive. Negative reinforcement is the behavior removes a unpleasant state or condition, which by doing so increases the behavior that way, by removing something aversive. So a good example of this would be Advil. Your likelihood to take Advil is for what? To remove a headache. That's a good example of a negative reinforcement. Now we have other kind of reinforcers, two other kinds that I want to mention to you. First is primary. I already mentioned this to you. Primary reinforcer is something essentially that we find innately satisfying. So food, innately satisfying. We also have things that are connected to primary reinforcers. We call them conditioned or secondary. And these are connected usually to a primary reinforcer, and essentially things like cash, a paycheck. If your parents have dangled out money at a certain grade point level, that would be another example of a conditioned reinforcer. So we have primary and conditioned or secondary reinforcers, which means that there's an intermediate kind of aspect to that. Two other ones to mention. One is immediate, which is kind of self-explanatory. I do a particular behavior and I get an immediate reward or reinforcement. In this case, that's what we're talking about. Or you also have a delayed reinforcer, which would be similar to a paycheck, which is delayed by 3 weeks in a lot of cases, or even a month. So a delayed reinforcer or an immediate reinforcer. So the keys to understanding reinforcement is understanding that reinforcement or a reinforcer only increases behavior. Okay? So even if it's negative, negative is the removal of an aversive situation or stimulus. Positive is the adding of a pleasant stimulus. And that's a good example of how this happens. So like a parent, for example, if a kid is whining and the parent responds each and every time, then essentially they're giving a positive reinforcer to the whining behavior. On the other hand, if a parent ignores the child and the whining stops and then they respond, then the child essentially learns that if I stop whining, I won't be ignored, which is the aversive stimulus, and I get something positive in reinforce positive affirmation or affection from a parent.